Welcome to the Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Revenge. The next person to cut me off in traffic is going to get a hot slice of foot-in-the-ass pizza. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Queens Boulevard. Watch the film that swept Sundance with breakout star Vincent Chase in the newly restored 4-hour director's cut, Queens Boulevard. Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers. We do the things with film, I guess. And part of that process is analyzing, reevaluating, getting better, reworking, what you've done. I think the hardest part of writing for me has been rewriting and getting comfortable with going back, hitting delete, starting over again and trying, see what else I can do. That's a really tricky process because it's hard to reimagine something that you've already done. It's like, hey, if you could, wake up again this morning, how would you do it differently? Like, I don't know. I've already done it. That was the way I did it. But you have to kind of reimagine what's another way I can approach, X, Y, Z. And I don't know, paradoxically, I guess, but I want to reimagine the way we opened the show last week. And so, because I normally try not to do two openers the same. If we've done a 206 episodes, hopefully, we've had about 200 unique openings discussing this and that. And so, especially back-to-back episodes. And so this week, I actually kind of want to revisit last week for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't even talk about why. So the topic last week, in case you missed it, or fast forwarded, who knows? But it is, what is the conflict, or how does it feel to not be original, to retread old ground? And the reason that came to mind as a topic was because I've had this idea for years, a story idea about teleportation. And to me, I had this really unique wrinkle on it. I was like, oh man, it's, and I don't want to spoil it for reasons that'll become obvious here in a moment. But I was just really interested in my take because I hadn't heard it or seen it before. We tend to watch Star Trek and say, oh, beam me up, Scotty, and it's all seamless, right? And so I like the idea of, I'm going to reimagine it in my own way, where I put kind of a microscope on the use of technology and how we think we use it versus how it maybe actually gets used. And so there was just some fun stuff that I was doing with there. And then, I don't know, I went down some Reddit rabbit hole, and lo and behold, my idea has not only been done, it was done before I was ever born.
Oh my gosh.
And so apparently there's an episode that covers almost exactly what I imagined in either The Outer Limits or what's the other one? Twilight Zone. Mm-hmm. I don't remember which. I haven't seen it. I've seen some of those episodes. Growing up, my mom loved Twilight Zone, so I'd watch it periodically. I only remember 2 episodes, well, 3 if you count the ones that I didn't see that I was told about. But it was just kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, Wes, you are not nearly. And then as that thread went down, I saw like multiple versions have been done of that thing. And so not only was I not the first, I wasn't even the second. Like, it was just on down. It's turtles all the way down. And then someone though said, you know what you should do is read The Jaunt. It's a Stephen King short story. So I went and found this short story by Stephen King called The Jaunt. And it's this whole story about teleportation. And it's incredible. It's maybe a 25-minute read. I'll link it in the show notes. And I was just blown away because it was fresh. It was not my idea or the other, dozen variations of my idea, quote unquote, obviously not.
Right.
And so, but reading his version, I was like, man, he took a really interesting idea and did his own thing with it that is uniquely Stephen King. And it kind of goes back to that thing you said last week, which is if you feel like you're treading water, like it needs more you. That's the real solution, is to give it more you. And Stephen King, God. And what really blew my mind was he wrote his short story in 1981. But when you read it, it doesn't feel like it's, 40 years old. It feels like it's, 5 years old. It's just,
Wow.
It's timeless because, when you approach certain topics in certain ways, it can have that effect. And I was just really impressed, obviously one's usually impressed with Stephen King. And he does some weird Stephen King-y things. If you've read, and I've only read, 7 or 8 of his books, and 7 of them were just one book, right? The Dark Tower series is just 7 books, but it's one thing. And I read that, and I think The Stand, as far as his fiction goes. Yeah. And so it's just, it's okay to not be original is what I walked out of our last conversation with. And the next day, I was feeling fresh. Like I just finished this big rewrite of a feature script. And so I just sat down and I was like, okay, don't be afraid for once. Don't be afraid of not being original. And so I sat down, outlined a story. We covered the movie once. It's this quote unquote musical. We don't consider it a musical, but I think it falls into that category. And I loved it, right? I love that film. And I was like, I've been fascinated with one of the shots in there. It's the opening shot of him busking on the street. And I've been wanting to just do that shot, jonesing for it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write once and I'm going to do what Todd says he does. I'm going to write this thing. I'm going to make it as close as I can. And then do whatever I feel I need to do to make it mine. And I did. I wrote the outline in 15 minutes. I texted you and I was like, hey, have an idea? It's my version of once. We're going to make our own once. And I was like, I'll write it and I'll email it tomorrow. I'm done for the night. And so I went and started cooking dinner, and I couldn't let it go. And then an hour and a half after I sent that text, I sent the script.
Yeah, it was like very, very soon after we sent the whole script.
It's one of the fastest things I've written. Normally, you sit down to write and it feels like 10 minutes, but it's actually like 2 hours, 3 hours. This I wrote while making and while cooking dinner and eating dinner. I wrote it, proofed it, and sent it in 90 minutes. And so that was, definitely really, really fast. And it felt good.
Like?
Huh?
What did it feel like?
I mean, it felt great. I felt like, it was an interesting experience to do it that way I like this thing. I like James Bond. I'm going to make my own anti-James Bond, right? I'm going to make Indiana Jones. It makes me wonder if there's something to that. Like I really try to make my own stuff, and it's mine. And this is Wes, and not necessarily because of ego. Like I want it to be like I don't bite off of other people, even though I have, and whatever, you deal with that and you move on. But also just because I want to see something that I don't see. And I do want my work to stand out as my own work. And it's a tricky thing. And so walking into this saying, I'm going to make a version of once that's mine and own it. Like, I think that was the hard part, is just getting over myself and saying, it's okay to say I was inspired by someone else's work. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not Glenn Hansard, so you're not going to get once. Sorry. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to be like that. It's going to be its own thing. And when you get into the edit, you might see something different than how you initially wrote it. And I think that because you only spent 2 hours in total on the whole thing, at least, in writing it, maybe you'll be more inclined to be okay with doing a pivot in the edit if you see something that you weren't planning on, right? And instead of being like, laser focus on something you've been working on for 2 years, you know what you want it to look like, right? And maybe something like this, you're not so invested in it.
Yeah.
It's a passion project that you want to just make because your buddy's in town and let's make something. So when you get in the edit, you're like, oh, you know what? I wrote it to be this, but maybe it's actually this. And then you just like change. I'm not saying that it would be that way. I'm just saying you might be more inclined to be okay with that because we're just making something. We're just making a piece of art, and whatever it turns into, it turns into.
Hell yeah.
So, but yes, I'm not Glenn Hansard. You're going to get not that.
By chance, are you Damien Rice?
By chance, I am not either.
Okay. We'll
Of
let you be
those
Todd
amazing
Sapio.
artists.
Yeah.
So it's actually interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I went to an open mic with my neighbor, and we were just going to check out this open mic just north of us, and these two ladies covered Volcano, Damien Rice song, and it was good, it was good, but they were covering it like happy and shit, and I was freaking out about it because I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't heard this song in forever, and this album destroyed me. It like changed my life, and I was telling my neighbor about it, and he was like, he'd never even heard of Damien Rice. And I said, oh my God, you need to immediately go home, open a bottle of wine with your wife and cry. Listen to Oh, yeah, exactly. And just be there, in the space, whatever, with her for an hour. And so no, I'm not Damien Rice, but I definitely draw from artists like that. For some reason, like I've sat down and tried to write pop songs. I mean, for a lot of my career, I was writing, pop songs and stuff, but that's not ever what really drove me. Like I would sit down to try to do that, and it'd be hard to do. But then the moment that I would sit down and like not think about anything, what would come out would be something that was, I mean, for lack of a better term, more substantial, I guess. I'm not saying that pop music isn't substantial. It definitely can be. And I think there's several artists today that can write substantial pop songs that are, they follow a formula, but if you listen to the lyrics and the emotion in the songs, like you can really hear that sustenance. But I was always gravitated towards, like Glenn Hansard and Damien Rice and Nick Drake and artists where it's like it was always more about the overarching feel than it was about that specific word you said or the phrase you said. It was like, you'd listen to a song and you obviously the lyrics are incredible. Listen to Damien Rice and the lyrics are incredible, but it's more about the feeling you get when you're done with a song. Where does it leave you? If it leaves you in a place where that's different from where you started, then that's way more substantial to me than, even listening to something like U2. U2, like Bono is an incredible lyricist. If you listen to Joshua Tree and it will destroy you. It's amazing. But there's something to listening to Oh that you do not get and you will never get from listening to even the best U2 album. Yeah. And it's not saying it's better or worse. It's just different. And I think you're similar in that regard where you like gravitate towards that kind of thing. So
yeah, I mean, including, the movie we're going to cover today, I think I definitely have some comments because I more than anything, I remembered how it made me feel. I really didn't remember all the booby traps that are in this movie conversationally.
Agree. And there are quite a few.
There are. This movie is nothing but booby traps. The bomb maker did his job very well.
Yes.
But I just remembered like the experience of it and going through it and how it left me feeling at the end. Because you do, go on quite a journey. I guess we can, with that, like, what are we covering today?
Yeah. So today we're covering Munich. So if you have not seen the film, please pause the episode and go watch it because we're going to spoil a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah, we'll talk about a few things. We'll look at some of the cinematography, not a lot. There's a really cool shot where I think they're heightening a moment through contrasting camera work that in a way that isn't very typical of Spielberg. We'll also look at some of the story and writing, some of the questions being raised, maybe contextualizing the film a little bit in multiple ways, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
Quick synopsis of the film. After the Black September capture and massacre of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics, 5 men are chosen to eliminate the people responsible for that fateful day. It's directed by Steven Spielberg, screenplay by Tony Kushner and Eric Roth. It's based on the book by Jonas. It's cinematography by Janusz Kaminski. featuring Eric Bana as Avner, Daniel Craig as Steve, Ciaran Hinds as Carl, Geoffrey Rush as Ephraim, Michael Lonsdale as Papa, and Mathieu Amalric as Louis.
I want you to give me proof that everyone we killed had a hand in Munich.
I don't discuss such things with people who don't exist. You want to discuss? Come back to existence. You want your daughter to grow up in exile.
I want evidence.
Professor Hamshari with a beautiful wife and child. He was implicated in a failed assassination attempt on Ben Gurion. He was recruiting for Fatah France. You stopped him.
We should have tried to bring him to Israel.
As a hater, you're a harmless little writer in Rome. He was behind the bomb on El Al Flight 76 in 1968. He was working on another bomb last August. I could go on and on with this
According
shit.
to evidence nobody has seen. If these people committed crimes, we should have arrested them. Like Eichmann.
If these guys live, Israelis die. Whatever doubts you have, Avner. You know this is true. You did well, but you're unhappy.
I killed 7 men.
Not Salame. We'll get him, of course. You think you were the only team? It's a big operation. You were only a part. Does that assuage your guilt?
Did we accomplish anything at all? Every man we killed has been replaced by worse.
Why cut my fingernails? They'll grow back.
Did we kill to replace the terrorist leadership or the Palestinian leadership? You tell me what we've done.
You killed them for the sake of a country you now choose to abandon. The country your mother and father built, that you were born into. You killed them for Munich, for the future, for peace.
There's no peace at the end of this, no matter what you believe. You know this is true.
So, man, I think as I alluded to, like, this film is talking about a lot of stuff, a lot of conversation going on in here. For one, I guess, what do you make of this in light of all the other Spielberg films we've been covering, right? Up to this point, we've covered Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Ready Player One, Jurassic Park, The Raiders of the Lost Ark, and here comes Munich. How does this fit into his oeuvre? Does this change at all the way you perceive Spielberg and his work? And yeah, what did you make of the film overall?
Yeah, this is why Spielberg is Spielberg. Is a movie like this. We talk about sustenance. The pop music was indie. Pop music was, I mean, you could even put Jurassic Park into that category, to an extent. I think Jurassic Park is a little bit, more sustenance, but this is his album he wanted to make for himself. This is his film he wanted to make for himself, I feel like. And this is one of the reasons why he's great, is because of what he's able to do. He's able to take something that I think, this generation was not privy to, right? 90%, like most of the people who, know this movie weren't alive during when this happened in 1972. So to take, a story that is very distant from most viewers and to make them feel it, and then at the end of the day, make them question whether or not, the whole journey that this team went on was even worth it. That's the kind of thing that, like, makes a film great. It, like, makes it stick with you, right? The whole point of Avner at the end, I mean, there's that whole section at the end where he is just warring with himself of what he did. And, they at the dinner, I think at the beginning, when the whole team is together for the first time, I think, or maybe it wasn't the first time, maybe it was like later on, one of the guys questioned, like, what did they do? And, Avner's like, it doesn't matter. This is our mission. And at the end, he's questioning it now, and he's thinking, I don't know what they did, but I was told to do this. And it's him warring with himself of did this make a difference at all? Were we just replacing people, and I loved the analogy of why cut my fingernails? They'll just grow back, but you do it anyway. It's just such good arguments on both sides that you can't help but think both could be right in some circumstance, right? If you're stepping back and looking at the full picture, it raises the question of revenge. It raises the question of duty to country. It raises the question of what your morals are and what are you willing to let die in yourself in order to be a good citizen or a good soldier or a good anything that you are committing yourself to. And the way that the story was told was so amazing because you're with Avner, you're the whole time, you almost never away from him. So you're thinking that the story is specifically him, but it's such it has this like broader feel to it the entire time. And I think that's the genius of Spielberg. And a film like this, finally, this is what I miss. Like, I'm not crazy about the lighting and like a lot of the stuff. I don't like the lighting that he does a lot. I really just don't. I think it's so hard and aggressive in moments where it doesn't need to be. Like when they're eating dinner for the first time, it's so hard. Like the windows are completely blown out. And I mean, I guess I'm imagining there's a point to that, right? I'm imagining this, like, we're not going to distract people by shit going on outside. We just want them to focus on what's happening inside. And so in a sense, it kind of shrinks the room, right? I don't see plants outside because I freaking can't see anything because it's blown out. But I really see the side of Avner's face. And there's like this hard, I can see one side and I cannot see the other side. It's almost like completely blacked out. And maybe that's the point, I guess. He's sitting at the head of the table. There's a dark side and a light side to him. But yeah, I'm just going to say that that's the reason and go with that. But that being said, the story is brilliant. It's complex. It highlights the complexity of Israel versus Palestine. It does a really good job in many ways of like trying to tell both sides, but in some ways it doesn't at the same time. Because how can he, right? To be honest. And, but tries to stick with the purpose of their journey is to kill these men. And then it throws wrenches in at really good moments. The scene we were just talking about, like before this, was the explosion scene, where they almost blow up the little girl. And I didn't remember if they did or not. And I was on the edge of my seat watching this, like, oh my God, Wes, I'm going to shoot you in the face if they kill this little girl. Cause I hate that stuff. And they don't. And I'm so happy that they don't, but it did so much. It was so much more effective to not in this case, because, and I just want to highlight this and then I'll let you talk, but that specific scenario and every other scenario in the whole movie stuck with me more because of the terror that they had, the terror that Avner had, and that who's the guy on the phone?
That's Carl. That
Carl and Avner had running to the car was so visceral that it did such a good job of conveying they don't want to do, like, they don't want to kill anyone at all. None of them do. Let alone a little girl, right? The whole thing was to not hurt the little girl. The whole thing was planned around not doing that. And so by them succeeding in not doing it, but having the terror communicated to us through their actions, like they didn't care if anybody saw them running to the car. They didn't care about any of that. They were just like, we got to stop this. Was very good way to convey their goals as a team, right? Of no civilian casualties, just We're just going after the men that we have to go after. That's it. It was an amazing moment where I then got to take a little breath too as a viewer, and say, okay, it's not going to be that kind of movie. But, okay, now I can continue on, so anyway.
Yeah. And I love the way that scene develops because it's such great sequencing. Like we see the little girl develop before they do. And so we had this nice dramatic tension building, a lot of great suspense that, starts to rise because of that. And then as everything dawns, right, we see Avner realize it. And then we see her pick up the phone, the light turn on, the tape start to be peeled away. Then we see the realization happen on Carl's face. And it's in that moment, and I love this, they cut all the audio, cut all the ambient noise, and it just creates this vacuum, this massive empty void that can only be filled by an explosion. Like you just assume this is inevitable. And it's just perfect. God. Because I've seen this 5-6 times. And I couldn't remember either. I actually assumed, oh man, this is where they kill the little girl. In my mind, they always kill the little girl. Thankfully, they never kill the little girl. And so I was just ready for my heart to shatter again. And then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, good. And it's just the sequencing and the use of audio there is so profoundly impactful, and just masterful storytelling at the heart of it. Yeah, I mean, and I agree with your analysis on the cinematography. Some of it feels a little dated, which is, I mean, this came out in 2005, which is not that long ago. To me, pre and post the year 2000 is a dramatic change in style and tone of filmmaking. And here he's using a lot of like pro mist filters, right, for this hazy, dreamy quality, especially when they're in Israel. It's all the sky is blown out and it's all creamy and fuzzy, and all the highlights are very hazy, and home is heaven, right? And I think that's kind of the idea behind that, in Israel at least. And then the rest maybe just we see it fade over time, and when we're out of Israel, we start to see that glow start to soften. I think is something they may be doing there. It's worth looking at. But regardless, I mean, it's overall pretty desaturated film, a lot of muted colors, just very dreary, very drab. Not that kind of excitement, visual excitement, but very contrasty, right? Not a lot of details in the highlights or the shadows. And I think it is very much, that's the world we're living in, where there's not a lot of gray area. Whenever you have low contrast, there's a lot of gray area. When there's not, right? It's just black and white. Everything is right and wrong. Everything is you're for us or you're against us, right? And here they're wiping out all that gray area, and that's the point for sure. Yeah. It's very headsy in that way, right? Yeah. While I'm on cinematography, like there's a great towards the end, man, when he's walking with his daughter across the street and he sees that car pull out. And you can feel his heart drop, like the paranoia kicking in, right? And I love this sequence because, one, we've built up so much tension through he's been killing everyone, but he's also been in hiding. He's no longer in hiding anymore. He's out in the open. And that's kind of expressed just through the way they shoot him in this scene. Him crossing a crosswalk. There's no buildings to take cover. There's no trees. It's just him out in broad daylight, very vulnerable. And while they're shooting him, a lot of handheld, very shaky, very grounded, almost documentary style. And all that shaky camera work contrasts so brilliantly whenever we cut to the shot of the car's window being rolled down, because that thing is locked off tight, like not a wiggle in that camera. And all you can see is the movement, like in the background, but the movement of that window being lowered, not all the way either. Feels like we're in a gangster movie. The hit's about to go down. You just see very quickly window drop, and our heart drops with it, and his as well. And it's just a sense of dread. It creates that contrast between calm, steady, the sense that you're on rails, like a train, right? You're moving toward a destination. Is perfect in the midst of all this shaky camera work. It creates a lot of dread and a sense of very, very tight focus on the attacker's part, which of course we realize pretty soon is littering, right? He's throwing a cigarette butt out. No attacker today. Yeah, but I feel the same way. I mean, this is one of my favorite Spielberg films. I wish we would see more of this kind of content, even if he doesn't want to tackle this area. Like, I would love to just see him do more dramas, hardcore dramas, because he does it so brilliantly. He knows how to create a moment of dramatic tension, whether that's through the action sequences or just through the arguments, right? We were listening to that argument, the clip that I played a minute ago, between Avner and Ephraim, played by Geoffrey Rush at the end there. And it's just two people talking, but you feel the tension between them and the way he blocks it, right? He has Avner walk way upstage so that whenever he turns around, he can charge him down and saying, did we do anything? Did we change anything? What was this for? Like, that's a dramatic argument that other directors might have just had them standing face to face the whole time. Spielberg said, no, I'm going to move him away from the camera so that he can then charge the camera. And that will reinforce his emotional state as well as his philosophical state. Like, those things are both coming crashing down, and Ephraim is absolutely impenetrable. He doesn't move an inch. And that is pointed as well, because that's the state of Israel, or at least the Mossad, kind of talking at us there. It's like, hey, you did what you told us to do. We told you to do. That's kind of what matters. And it's brutal. But I love it. I would love to see him do more films like this. I somehow doubt that's in the cards. He just seems to really enjoy making fun movies for people to escape into, and that's okay too. That's not wrong by any stretch.
This is definitely not an escape movie. No,
it's one you wish you could escape from.
Right, exactly.
God,
exactly.
I'll run through a few things and open it up because it's a dicey one. Story and writing wise, the subtitles I thought was interesting because they sometimes use them, sometimes they don't. So sometimes, they're not speaking in English and we have no idea what they're saying. And I love when they choose to subtitle versus when they don't, because sometimes the words don't matter. The scenario does, the situation does. They just want you to imbibe it and digest what's happening on screen, not what's being said. And that could be, there's a lot of scenes where that happens. One of them is when Daniel Craig's character, Steve, is in the car with this woman and they're about to do that first hit. And he's got her talking and she stops. She's like, no, keep talking. And that's when we realize they're not having a conversation at all. This is all pretense. This is all a setup, right? And so they do that in other scenes where there clearly is a conversation going on. We're just not privy to it because it's not the point. Maybe it's because Avner doesn't understand, or maybe it's because it's the only thing we're trying to engage in is the context of the scene, the energy of the scene sometimes. I just found that fascinating. I think the tendency is translate it all, but that's not always beneficial to the viewer. Questions being raised in this film. A lot. Mm-hmm. This is the meat of it right here. Well, there's one thing that isn't explicitly being questioned or raised, but I think it's lightly, subversively kind of implied just by nature of watching this movie, which is, to me, the question would be, if it were raised within the film, which it is not again, is how did the media in televising the massacre impact the world? And this is an interesting one, especially in light of the final shot. Try to remember this. I doubt I'll remember to revisit it, but try to remember that question. How did televising it impact the world? For one, the Olympics, from what I gather, and this is such a crazy, everything about the timing of this is wild. We are at the 50th anniversary of this massacre this month. Like, I just read a few minutes ago an article from a few days ago from the NPR discussing this. Going out, I didn't finish the article, but it was just like, oh crap, we're on that anniversary. We're also on the anniversary of 9/11. We're recording today, Sunday, September 11th, 2022. 21 years to the day of 9/11. And so whenever you think about these events, there's especially what blows my mind reading that NPR article about the 72 massacre in Munich. The Olympics continued as scheduled. Apparently, from what I understand, there was no break in the games. And so on, yeah, that's wild. If accurate, because there was one newsman that was like, man, on one TV we have the hostage situation, and on the TV next to it we have, whatever, pole vaulting like going on. And it was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen on TV before in my life, and you gotta believe that, right? That's incredibly disturbing. And apparently, this event had a big effect, again, according to that NPR article. Prior to this, massacre, televised massacre, more or less, that there were about 11 terrorist organizations. And then within a few years afterwards, there were over 4 times as many. There's like something of over 50 terrorist organizations. Now, I don't know how they're counting terrorist organizations. That's a hard topic to tackle as well, because who gets to determine who's a terrorist? Usually it's the government, and the government doesn't always have honesty in mind, right? They have their own political agendas, as this movie beats into us, right? Like we literally spent almost 3 hours discussing how, looking at how Avner, Steve, Carl, bookkeeper, the bomb maker, all go after the 11 people responsible for the 72 Munich killings. And we get to the end of the film and find out maybe one of them kind of had something to do with it. Like they were serving a completely different agenda than the one they signed up for. That's wild. What? And so whenever someone says, there's over 50 terrorist organizations, I don't know who's tallying that, what criteria they have for that. It's all very fluid, depending on who's defining, right? Whoever gets to define the terms wins the game. If I invent a game for you and I to play, I get to win because I get to make the rules. And that's kind of implied. And so other questions being raised, again, that's a bigger question that I think as a viewer, you take away from it than anything Spielberg maybe was trying to create. But I'm not saying that's not a possibility as well, because we spend a lot of time watching news coverage of events. And so there might be something that he actually was trying to get to about the way we consume, the news or a million other things. We'll circle back to that maybe. So other questions. One of the first questions that were asked, is there morality, right? We get into this conversation. There's this nice segue before Louis and Avner hook up, right? Louis provides all the intel for Avner to find and track these guys. Well, I love that we don't waste that connection. We spend time with Avner's old buddy, who's maybe part of the Red Army faction or something else. And we're meeting this guy's girlfriend, and she's speaking, I don't know what she was speaking, German maybe, I forget, but she's having this whole conversation and asking if, is there morality? Is there right and wrong? And she's posing these questions about what is the nature of right and wrong? Just the act of being alive and conscious creates right and wrong, and it's all based on perception of who is right and who is wrong. And I find that interesting because when it comes to revenge, or defending home or ideals, is there morality, right? And then they go a step further, because the very first name that they get, the very first kill, is this professor who's translating, a Palestinian guy who's translating Arabian Nights, and he's asking his audience, right? He's just doing the street side talk, and he's asking this really profound question about how does our own narrative inform our perception of morality, right? does it justify our actions? And how does it allow us to survive, or maybe just to endure? It's a really fascinating, perspective, because that's kind of the history of mankind, is one of us narrating our lives as the heroes in our own stories. No one narrates their life saying that I'm the villain. And we talk about that a lot in superhero films and other films. But it's way different to talk about it in this kind of context of a real world situation with people and real stuff at stake. And so whenever you start bringing in the idea that how our own narrative informs our perceptions of these things, that's fascinating. And that is a question this movie is raising, and it's asking repeatedly throughout the film in all kinds of situations, scenarios, and perspectives. And it begins, I might say, with Golda Meir, the prime minister, the woman at the beginning who I'm not familiar with. I don't know her whole story, but she says as prime minister something profound and scary, because she says every nation finds it necessary to compromise with its own values. Ooh, I mean, that's harsh, man. That's because that's setting you up for, hey, I'm about to ask you to do a bunch of stuff it's going to compromise you, but it's something that everyone does. And I mean, she's not wrong. It's something
for the greater good, whatever that might be.
Good. I mean, that is the history of the world as well. It's one of, victors determining morality. And we'll see once we get to the end, no one's exempt. Because at the end of the day, everyone feels justified, no matter who you are. And in this film, everyone feels justified for their actions. We get an interview with the Black September terrorists, the three who escaped. They got away and they got brought back. Germany was left again with another hostage situation, and they said, free the Black September guys, the remaining survivors. And they did. They gave them up. And then they're doing a press conference, and a reporter asked them point blank if they thought it was okay to kill all those Israeli athletes. And this guy says, he doesn't say yes or no. He just states his reasoning is, we have made our voice heard by the universe or the world who has not been hearing before. He's justifying. He's absolutely saying it was worth it because now people hear us and now people see us. And then we get to the safe house with the PLO, which is a whole crazy sequence, right? Because that scene is them sleeping under the same roof in the same room with their enemy. Now, the enemy doesn't know it, but they do. Now, these particular people are not on their target list, but they are like their enemy. The PLO is the whole reason this movie says that Salome, who I think founded the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, who starts the Black September group, right? And this is what a lot of governments and organizations, political organizations do. They'll create these, groups that gives them plausible deniability, which again is what this movie is. Literally, you have Mossad creating a terrorist cell, right, through Avner and his group, in order to give plausible deniability to Israel to go and carry out all these, acts of revenge. And so that their voice would be heard and understood and recognized, right? Everyone's making the same argument. And we get into this. And what's interesting, to finish that thought about this scene with the PLO, is this beautiful moment that they have with the radio. They're sharing a roof and they begin fighting over the music. And then they both sit down, they turn the dial, and they find common ground on Al Green.
Yeah.
American music, right? It's some cultural middle ground that they find through a third party, which is, I don't know, maybe pointed, maybe not. But it's just nice that they had a moment where they saw eye to eye and like, yeah, we both like Al Green. We're both human beings. How about that? But then we cut to this conversation between Avner and this PLO guy, and Avner's asking, was the attack on Munich justified? Was what they did justified? And this This guy is like, hey, man, my father didn't gas anybody in Germany. Like, years and years of Palestinian blood being spilled by Israelis. And who's mourning for us? Like, he's justifying, like, yeah, it's okay because this is what we need to do in order for us to be recognized and for people to understand that we're going through something too, because y'all are putting us in a cage and you're treating us like animals, and people are going to start to wonder about the condition that you're leaving these animals in for them to want to bite everyone all the time. And it's interesting. It's a question you have to wrestle with. And so, but what about our group, our gang, Avner and Steve and Carl and the other two? Well, the first kill I thought was really interesting because you have this scene where this professor reads, and then he goes to the store, he buys some wine, he buys some milk and something else, a jar full of something. And whenever they shoot him, he falls down, blood, wine and milk spill everywhere. And obviously the wine is kind of symbolic of blood. And I think that's a commentary on the promised land of milk and honey. Because it's no longer a land of milk and honey, right? It's now a land of milk and blood. Like you're soiling this land. And I don't think I'm fabricating that, because immediately the next scene, we get into a conversation. The confirm, right? Well, for one, let's touch on just that kill a moment here, because Avner, man, what a transition this guy goes through. He gets into this first situation, pulls the gun on him, confirms his name. Are you whatever? He's like, yeah. He's like, okay. Do you know why I'm here? Confirm your identity? And this guy's like, he's already did it. He's already confirmed who he is. Like, he doesn't want to do this. Like you said earlier, he doesn't want to kill anybody really when it comes down to it, but he does. And we'll see how that changes later, but they get back to to celebrate, right? Angels are rejoicing because the Egyptians are drowned in the Red Sea. And then you have Carl saying, God is watching you rejoice because you killed some of his people? He's like, no. The angels respond to God. We're celebrating because the Egyptians now understand their point, who held them hostage, right? Or whatever. And so there's this common, and I'm saying that's related, that's tied together with land of milk and honey, because Moses is the one who was given the promise that they will find the land of milk and honey in Exodus. And so, and he's obviously the one that crossed the Red Sea, split the Red Sea, all that fun, incredible Bible work. Also some really solid writing. Nyak, nyak, nyak. And so, and so we move from there to the second kill, right? Which we've discussed with the little girl narrowly being avoided. And a little bit easier, but we're no longer using the guns. Like, we're much more interested in being away from that intimate relationship of killing. Now we just kind of want a bomb to do the work, and remove ourselves emotionally just a little bit from what we're actually doing. But then as the story progresses, after several kills, we, the audience, don't know, man. All the targets are starting to blend together. We have no idea who we're killing anymore, what specifically they did, what's their role in Munich. We don't know. And even less, we're starting to care less about bystanders. Like, we get to that scene towards the end with was it the PLO guys, and the bomb doesn't work right, the one in the TV set, and Avner's talking to the bomb maker. He's like, trigger it. And he's like, wait, are we sure he's alone? Just flip the switch. What a difference from confirming you got the right guy twice and avoiding killing a little girl. Now we don't care, doesn't matter. Just kill them all, kill everyone, kill everything, which is what they do in that scene, man. That everything gets out of hand pretty quick. And they try to pay off a guy, and the guy could not care less about their money. Crazy sequence. And what happens to the individuals? Steve has an interesting take because he never has any regret. His philosophy, the thing that he's raising is, unless we learn to act like them, we will never defeat them. And that's kind of everyone's attitude. It's like, it's a race to the bottom, right? Like whoever acts the worst wins. And that's Steve's mentality. And to some degree, it pays off for him. Because if we look at Carl starts showing regret about their tactics, right? He's the cleanup man. He's the guy that goes in and makes sure we didn't overlook anything. You dropped a shell. I'm going to pick up this bullet casing so that we don't get caught. If you leave a passport, I'll make sure, right? You don't get caught, whatever. This is the guy. But he's starting to regret their tactics, right? And he even has this point of conversation with Avner. Suffering thousands of years doesn't make you decent. We were righteous. That's Jewish. That's a beautiful thing, right? And so he's starting to grapple with all the things he's done, because even before this story started, he tells us, I've been killing for this country for years. Don't you tell me about me being a coward or this, that, and the third. And then, of course, that's followed up by him being killed by the Dutch assassin. And that's brutal. That whole sequence of them killing the assassin, right? The bookkeeper kind of does the final blow. This is interesting, right? Killing the assassin because they go into her home. She's vulnerable, right? She's topless at the end of it. And she's shot. Then she goes to her cat. And then they, give her a headshot, and she's just left exposed, dishonored, right? This is a horrific scene. This scene really takes the breath out of you because it feels way more personal than a big explosion that you can just kind of bury the intimate death, right? They wanted it to be close and personal. We're going to go in, we're going to make sure she knows it's us. And we feel it, man.
And she wasn't part of their mission.
Off book.
It was pure revenge for taking out Carl, and the way, the older guy on the team, I forget his name, but the way he comes in and just finishes it off and then he leaves her exposed, and then he feels really bad about it later. And
that's right.
Avner tries to say, you were not yourself. And that's why he takes his own life, I feel like.
I agree. It's interesting because in that aftermath of killing her, Avner cooks this huge meal. No one's right. Everyone's wrong, emotionally. And I think Avner's trying to recreate home, and he's acting like his team hasn't fallen apart. There's 3 of them now. One's dead. One is mind is melted. The bomb maker, right? He's left. And they're just shrinking bit by bit. And even Steve even makes a comment like, are you expecting someone? What's all this food for? We have enough food to feed Bangladesh. And, the bookkeeper won't even eat. He's just drinking himself away. And it gets into that conversation with him, right? And he's frustrated because each time we kill someone, we raise 6 more up in their wake. And I keep seeing the Dutch woman. It's not that I wish we hadn't killed her. I wish I'd let you close her housecoat. That's fascinating, because what he's saying effectively is, I don't regret murder. I just wish we'd do it with a little more decency. What the fuck? That's a mind-bending place to put yourself, right? Because in reality, there is no decency in murder. There's no way to do it well. You're either taking a life or you're not. And it's always going to suck. The most you can hope for is to be justified in doing it. And yet here he is doing both. And that's really weird. But the totality seems to be that guilt seems to be a death sentence, right? The bomb maker gets himself killed. It's not clear to me if he did that to himself or if, someone set him up. That's very much, ambiguous, I think, unless you have a stronger read on that. But Carl, catches a lot of guilt, immediately lets his guard down, gets killed, right? He's looking for comfort. That's why he goes with the honey trap. And then you have, the bookkeeper, same thing, right? He feels guilty. He takes his own life. And so we can just see the team falling apart as it's wrestling with their conscience about what they're doing. And so that's what the team is, the conversation around the team is looking like as they're wrestling with what they're doing. Is it right? Is it justified? What about the country? what questions are being raised by the country. I found this conversation between Avner and his mom just mind-blowing, and I'll play it.
Everyone in Europe died. Most of my family. A huge family. I never talked to you about it.
I knew.
You knew? So what was there to say? I didn't die because I came here. When I arrived, I walked up to the top of a hill in Jerusalem and prayed for a child. I never prayed before, but I was praying then. And I could feel every one of them praying with me. You are what we prayed for. What you did for us. You did for your daughter, but also for us. Every one of the ones who died wanting this. We had to take it, because no one will ever give it to us. A place to be a Jew among Jews, subject to no one. I thank God for hearing my prayer.
Do you want to know, Mama? Do you want me to tell you what I did?
No. Whatever it took, whatever it takes. A place on earth. We have a place on earth. At last.
What I find just mind-blowing about that, for one, we have an analogy at play here. One is that at the beginning of the film, a conversation between Avner and his wife, she says point blank to Avner, "You think Israel is your mother." Mm-hmm. And now we have his mom talking. And so we can kind of imbue her with the voice of Israel as she's asking, or, you know, she's telling him, I don't want to know about the horrible things you did to get us here. I'm just glad we're here. And it's wild to be okay with putting your son through that kind of experience, and then saying, I put my fingers in my ears because I don't care. I don't want to know. I'd rather be ignorant to the truth. That's one aspect of that. And there's a lot of aspects to this conversation. The next wrinkle is we have to look at the final shot of the film, which is the Twin Towers. We finished this film looking at the Twin Towers, which of course in the 70s would have still been standing. But as we talk here on 9/11, we have to factor in that as a question that's being raised by this film, as we're looking at and thinking about who attacked us and why, and are they justified. We also think about how did we respond? Is that okay? Are we justified, and why? And we also don't want to know. We are the mother, you know, if we're thinking about America as a country, and parallel to Israel, we're doing the same thing, right? If we're the people who get to inquire and get to know about what our country's up to, we don't want to know. We don't want to ask those questions either. We want to just exist in this blissful ignorance of we're safe, we're happy, everything's fine, and there is no blood being shed. We have no CIA, ongoings in other countries, which is obviously wrong. We're just not interested. I'm doing my best to not weigh in. I'm sorry if it creeps out here and there. I'm just trying to discuss the film and let the film exist as raising these questions, and do my best to not answer it, my own perspectives. But I think it's raising that too. If you conspicuously watch this film for the conversation in totality, and especially the final note, and this is where contextualizing the movie, I think, helps, because this was released in 2005. This is the aftermath of 9/11, the aftermath of two wars, right? Afghanistan, Iraq, and, starting to think about Iran at this point. That's kind of history. Thankfully, now in 2022, we're not as ramped up about tensions with Iran, but 2005, man, that looked like the next one on the list. And so you have to ask these questions about how comfortable are we with where we are versus how we got here. And if you don't ask those questions, I suspect you open yourself up to looking over your shoulder, right? Because that's where Avner ends. He does all these acts. He never rests in peace. We see the difference in how he has sex with his wife, right? When we first open, it's careless, right? He's next to her. You know, a lot of the attention is on her and her experience. And it's beautiful. It's intimate. It's funny. They're kind of laughing afterwards. It's light. And then we see the second time he's having sex at the end of the film, he could not be more detached. She is just a body. It's not his wife. You know, his head is somewhere else completely. He's not making eye contact. His mind is thinking about, you know, his country and the inciting thing that sent him off to be so far away from his wife, even now as he's with her, you know, physically. And what was it for? You know, it's the result though, is that he's neither has peace himself, nor does he have safety, right? He gets off the phone call. And I love that call with Papa. Avner, you believe me, don't you, Avner? Michael Lonsdale is amazing.
I know, right?
Oh, but he tells him point blank, you have nothing to fear from me.
Yeah.
And the implicit, you know, thing that he's saying is other people still want you dead. People are coming for you. And I think that's the subversive message that's being sent. You can't go do all the things that Avner did and expect to come home to America without any punishment. And my interpretation of this movie is, if all that was precursor, our final look is at the Twin Towers, I think there's an implication that what happened on 9/11 wasn't the first stone thrown. It was the biggest, and it was the one that hit us and therefore raised our attention, even if it wasn't the actual inciting event. It was a culmination of decades of policy. And I think that's as clear as I can get it without actually weighing in if I'm interpreting the film correctly.
I mean, I would agree. I would.
That seems like that's no other, where it's pointing, right?
Very pointed at that. And I think that anybody who's done any kind of historical research could also, you know, like, look, I don't think even in this conversation, nobody is condoning something like 9/11 or something, you know, like any retaliation for it. Nobody's condoning any kind of violence here. We're just saying, if, you know, anybody who's actually done research on history as to, you know, the United States' role in anything, in violence overseas and against violence done against Americans, it's pretty evident of where this is pointed at the end there. And I think that you can say that and still be patriotic and still think 9/11 was a terrible thing that should never have happened. And like, you know, but then the question then rises, okay, what's the retaliation and at what level? And what are the ramifications of that retaliation? And you have to understand that, you know, similar in this regard, like violence begets violence, begets violence, begets violence. You can't kill someone's father and then have that child think that they had something taken away from them in their own innocence. You know, they did nothing wrong, and yet you took their father from them, but they love their country too. And it's this whole, I don't know, it goes back to Imagine by John Lennon. It's like, what if there were no countries, there was no religion? I mean, the idea of that is fantastic. It's also fantastical, because that will never happen. There will always be people believing in certain things. There will always be people, you know, wanting a place to lay their head, wanting their own Israel, wanting their own United States. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not even saying that. It's just what you do to maintain that. You should ask yourself these questions. I should ask myself these questions because I've been, if I'm being completely frank, I have been sheltered from that my whole life. I haven't had to go to war, for it. I haven't had to be told to pull a trigger to end someone else's life to defend this country. So I haven't been put in those situations. So as much as I would like to say, I love this country and I would defend it, it's a very hard thing to also be in the situation and do that, because that is another human being who's also doing the same exact thing on their end. I think, yeah.
It's an interesting film because I think the way I read it is largely it's an open-ended inquiry. I feel like Spielberg is making the point to ask the questions, not to deliver an exact answer, because you do have to kind of read the tea leaves a little bit to walk away with much of anything, because everyone you talk to, every conversation that happens, everyone is saying why they're justified and why what they're doing is the right thing and is the only way. There is no other way, is kind of the takeaway. And it's unfortunate as much as it is natural. Humanity, for whatever reason, and I'm sure it's evolutionarily, advantageous to be so tribal. We're all so tribal, and it's, in a lot of ways really weird, as much as it is logical, because we do it in all kinds of ways. Yes, we'll do it nationally, we'll do it regionally, we'll do it by the city, we'll do it by the block, or we'll do it by our sports teams, by who we love in music. Like, it's so weird to go to a pro game. Like, I've been to pro games, and in the lobby, a fight breaks out between this team and that team, fans of this team and that team. How weird is that?
Yeah.
Something so utterly pointless, and yet here we are, people fighting, had one drink too many, and mad because my guys lost and you're making fun of me for losing, and pop right in the kisser. It's like, what are you doing? But if we can get that riled up over, something as inconsequential as a sports team, home becomes such a, much easier thing to justify in your minds. Right. And that's where you hear the PLO guy talking to Avner. You don't know what it is to not have a home.
Yes. I was just going to bring up that scene. Right.
You say it's nothing, but then you have a home to go back to.
Yeah.
Home is everything.
And I think that scene is necessary. In fact, I wish there were more of I wish it was longer, or we had more time with that guy, with that Palestinian guy, because like, we need both sides, we need, and I don't think that we fully got the Palestinian side here. I think that, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. It's not that story. Fine. But his moment that he had, and that actor, oh my God, is unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable, because I saw anger, I saw sadness, and the thing that like kind of got me a little bit was, and I guess, this, now that I'm watching it again, right, is Avner's response to him was so angry. It was so angry. It was not like, I'm hearing you at all. He wasn't hearing this guy at all. He was like completely oblivious. And I feel like maybe earlier on in the film, before some of the other kills happened, if he had talked to this guy, his response might have been a little different. But you can see in his face, Avner is just like, you are the scum of the earth,
It's wild, because, and I think, on that note, like, it's weird to me how invested people in the West get over that conversation. People are weirdly invested in something they have no stake in. There's so much context, and there's so much, back and forth between what happened in Israel and Palestine, and why it happened, and what's happening now, and why it happened in the first, and I have a recommendation, that'll help anybody who wants to learn more about that whole conflict. It's really enlightening and useful just to use as a primer. But I've listened to so many, I don't know, quote unquote armchair experts who really miss the boat. It's such a weird thing to be so emotionally invested in. And obviously it comes down a lot to religious belief and perspective and that kind of thing. But yeah, I have no stake in the game. And so for me, it's a lot easier to be objective and say, call balls and strikes and want the best for everyone involved. And it's complex for sure. But this movie, I thought that, and you're right. I mean, that you don't get the full scope, but I don't think you get the full scope from anyone. Like we don't have the full scope from Israel because they barely touch on the 6-Day War. And it's more hinted at than discussed. Why it happened, was Israel justified, that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's wild. You get a little bit of World War II, Holocaust, that conversation with the mom, she touches on it. And it's touched on in the PLO conversation in the safe house. Yeah, this movie I thought just does a really excellent job. I think the thing that I love about it the most, now thinking about it from a writing standpoint, is we don't spend a lot of time discussing like murder tactics or specific targets. This guy, right? We're hit number 4. We're going after this guy. This guy did XYZ. He's part of the plan. Here's how we're going to take him down. You're going to be in position. We just kind of cut to it, right? What we do spend lots of time discussing, though, philosophy of tactics, the philosophy of home and the cost of home, the morality, the guilt. What does success look like? What does it mean? Like we spend a lot of time wrestling with these bigger ideas. And I love that because that's what this movie is about. So make it about that. And spend a lot of your time raising questions, making us think for ourselves. And to some degree, having a little bit of footing in this world will go a long way to appreciating the conversation. But even without that, you can still pull out a lot. You can still really digest quite a bit because we're so in tune with Avner and what he's going through. And you're right, man. That is a really interesting perspective whenever he gets upset and he starts attacking. Like he's almost giving up his identity, his covert operation identity, to just put this random guy in his place. Like, you don't know him. He's not your target, or else you would have smoked him a long time ago. Instead, you should just be like, yeah, I totally get it. Right? Like, just go play the part. Nope. Can't let it go. We're going to have this one out. You don't get it. You're animals or whatever. This guy's like, whoa, man, you Germans. He doesn't realize, yeah, he's kind of German, but he's actually Israeli. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening. Yeah, this is a really well-written film. It helps that you have someone like Eric Roth, writing it. But fantastic. I don't know. I think that's as much as I can get out without getting my own, foot in the door.
Yeah, no, I agree. Fantastic film. This is the reason why Spielberg is brilliant and will be one of the greatest forever, for sure. I have my issues with him, but I think a lot of that stems from movies that I think that are not of substance. Yeah. That I think is the thing that makes him great. You're not. I mean, yes, you're gonna. We did Raiders last week, and we've done Jurassic Park and stuff, but like the timeless stuff for me is movies like this, like Munich. So yeah, amazing story, amazingly acted, amazingly shot, and directed, and the camera work is really great, and it tells this really amazing story. And yeah, it's not something that I could watch every year, right? Honestly, but once every 5 or 10 years, just to remind me of what that man can do is definitely amazing.
Totally agree. Yeah, my God. Yeah. Recommendation for the week?
Yeah, so I've been talking to my wife about Shia LaBeouf lately, and so he's an interesting guy. What?
Shia LaBeouf? Have you seen? I've shown you that short film about Shia LaBeouf, right?
I don't think so.
Oh my God, I will put it in the show notes. It's Rob Cantor. It's a musical. It's actually a theatric stage play. It's like this 10-minute sketch about Shia LaBeouf, and
it's about him. It doesn't even have him in it.
It's about him, and it's easily my favorite thing ever put on the internet.
Oh my God. Okay. Yes. No,
so
please
weird.
share. Please share.
So good. Okay. Yeah. As you were.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think he's an incredible actor and an incredible artist in general. I just think he's amazing. I think he's very sick in a lot of ways. First, he was sick because of drugs and alcohol, and now I think he's sick for other reasons. But nevertheless, he is unafraid when it comes to creating things. And so I'm going to recommend Honey Boy. I just loved this movie, and it's just a movie about his dad, and he plays his dad in the film, and his relationship, and the boy in it, Noah Jupe, is incredible as well. So the acting, the writing, the whole story in general, and the fearlessness of him writing and doing this movie in general, and then showing his father, is like, that's the kind of stuff that makes waves for me in art, is this desire to make something so bad that you know you're going to hurt people that you love, and yet you feel like you need to do it anyway, whether that's cathartic for yourself or cathartic in a way to help other people. It doesn't matter. It's just you make it anyway. And it's a great example of that. So, Honey Boy.
Wow. Nice reco. I'm going to recommend a book. It's called The Palestine-Israel Conflict, A Basic Introduction. It's by Gregory Harms and Todd M. Ferry. This was a book I picked up just trying to get my footing to understand what happened and is happening in Israel and Palestine, that whole conflict. And I thought it did a really fantastic job. It's the kind of book where it doesn't tell you what to think. It just kind of lays it all out. And it's the kind of book that I think would frustrate both sides. And kind of like a referee, that's probably what you want. You don't want one person getting to tell the story like, that was not a foul. Of course, of course you don't think so. That's your guy. And so I thought it did a really good job of laying the groundwork and some important moments. Obviously, not everything. It's a basic introduction, not a point by point, breakdown analysis. And it's digestible, and it starts like a million years ago. Literally, we start way back so that you can kind of see how the land developed, how the people developed there. And then you kind of gradually see how everything moment by moment transitions through the First World War, before the First World War, of course, through the whole shebang. And it gives you a very strong understanding of the big moments, as well as some of the smaller moments that invoke a lot of emotion and frustration, and just different ways to think about what's going on. I thought he does an incredible job. I've actually wanted to make a docuseries, like an 8 or 10 part Netflix style docuseries on that, using that book as a foundation and expanding it a little bit, based on some other things that I think are relevant to the conversation. And and just, call it a primer, make it a series, whatever. Yeah. Fascinating, really useful, to just kind of get some basics down, because that's such a hot button thing. And anytime you hear anyone, passionate about it, it's easy to get lost within the first 2 seconds, such as this movie. So I recommend that. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Stay tuned as we continue or come to the end of Spielberg September, as we take a look at Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So we'll see what Spiels has to say with the final last movie ever of Indiana Jones.
Hardly.
Oh, hardly. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe, drop us a review, leave us a note if it's something you want us to cover, the kinds of things you find interesting. And if you want to leave a note on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Munich.
And I love that you made the quote of the day from from the Queen. So this past week, we lost Queen Elizabeth II. God rest her soul. And so our quote of the day today is from her, Queen Elizabeth II. It has perhaps always been the case that the waging of peace is the hardest form of leadership of all. That waging of peace, that's an amazing way to say that. And she was a woman of very few words. I mean, there's not a whole lot of sound bites over the 70 plus years of her reign that are she didn't say very much. She's a woman of few words. And so when she does say something as incredibly insightful as this, it's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people feel different ways. I don't have a particularly strong affection for the monarchy, and I find it weird in so many ways. But at the same time, we were born with her, and, you know, to a large extent, I thought she would outlive us all. She's been a fixture, right? And the longest reigning monarch, as far as I know, in all of history. 70 some odd years spanning, as I'm sure everyone at this point has heard all the, you know, wild things that she's overseen from her time in power. If we want to call it power, that's a whole weird conversation. But that phrase that you pointed out, waging of peace, like, I love that so much. It's so perfect, because all the recognition, you know, when we usually look at leaders, is how they wage war. And it's so much easier to throw a punch than to talk someone out of one, right? To defuse a bomb is really, really hard. To push the button is not. And we just don't idolize peacemakers at all, let alone enough. No one really has a soft spot for, you know, Edward the Peaceful or whatever, right? And it sucks, because is there anything more important, you know, than finding peace? That's when all the good stuff happens. That's when, you know, people actually get to have love and, you know, family and community, and get to enjoy a good meal, right? And so it's unfortunate that we don't respect and honor peacemaking as much as, you know, war making. Yeah.
Well said, Queen. Yes, Queen.
Yes, Queen.
Well, we miss you. Godspeed, for sure. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I had a reasonable time covering.
Yeah, that's right.
It's hard to say. I had a good time talking about Munich. But no, I definitely learned a lot. Thank you for your insight there, Wes. And if you guys could share us, subscribe, review, all that stuff, it helps tremendously. Share us with your friends, review us on any platform you get this. It all helps. And if there's a film that you'd like to see us cover, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you, and we may cover it. Who knows? And until next week, I am Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.
I got nothing for this one. Yeah.
His bombs never go off.
They never.
Or they just never write.
Right. Too small. You went too big, man.
Yeah. Although I do remember, like, the shot of him turning off the light and like, that's the cue. Like, give him 10 seconds to get out of the fucking room. Like, really, holy shit. It was almost immediate.
Like,
yeah. Whereas before, when they were doing it the first time, or the first bomb, the second guy, you know, he's like taking multiple stickers off the thing, you know? And now it's just like, so whatever. Yeah, learn his lesson.
Look at it.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Cutting.